Hi friends and family, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video is going to be focused on Oswald Wirth. I had thought that I had done a video on his decks, and I couldn't find them myself. For those of you who've been with me for a while or who've seen, videos of me discussing my early experience in tarot, you know that I started with the Besançon style 1JJ Swiss tarot deck in like 1975 or 1976. And in those days, as you can imagine, well, the 1JJ Swiss was the first tarot deck introduced in the United States. But soon after, on the heels of that, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck appeared. And so our market was flooded. The American market was flooded with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. But I had already bonded with the 1JJ Swiss. And so I was in pursuit of finding decks that were pip style rather than the one created by Pamela Coleman Smith, because that's the one I had already bonded with. So at some point I found, and I think I found it in the 70s, but this deck is from the 90s, I guess, or later. And the reason for that, I replaced a lot of decks that I had in my youth that I think my parents tossed when I went to college, or maybe I shouldn't blame them, but maybe I was careless with them and I lost them or something like that. But I replaced them as I realized they were missing from my life, because sometimes when you have a lot of decks, it's hard to keep track of them, especially if you move from location to location. I moved across country twice, so there are some casualties inevitable with losing things. At any rate, I had found at some point, probably around 1980 or whatever, the Oswald Wirth deck, which was created by U.S. Game Systems, Inc. Now, what I didn't realize at that time was that he didn't create this deck. It's based on his deck. And he also did not create a 78 card deck. He focused on the 22 cards of the higher trump order. But I didn't know any of this at the time. And so I used this deck. I bought this deck and I used this deck like I would have used my Besançon. But at some point, I started realizing that it was a little bit different. It had, these letters that I had absolutely no familiarity with. They turned out to be Hebrew letters, but that wasn't part of my experience up until that point. So I didn't know anything about that, and I was kind of intrigued. So I, would go to peruse bookstores until I finally found a book that had his name on it, and it was called The Tarot of the Magicians. Now, at the time, when I saw what it was called in French, I kind of translated it to be something like, images from the Middle Ages or something like that. So in the title itself, it seemed like there was recognition that the cards came from the Middle Ages. And in the content, this is a book he wrote, and I don't think this copy is available any longer. However, it's been updated and with new forewords from many contemporary folks who are living today, so you can still get this book. It just doesn't look like this. And he wrote this book, and in the book itself, he acknowledges that the cards found their way to France via Venice, but they stopped short of recognizing that the Italians invented the deck, and he, under the tutelage, it seems, of Stanislaus di Guaita, and I'm sure I'm saying the name improperly, but kind of established, or under the direction of Di Guaita, he created a tarot deck around 1896. And in 1896, the deck, incorporated, the Hebrew alphabet, the Kabbalah, and, De Guaita opened Wirth's eyes to the possibility that there was a whole ancient history regarding the tarot, but not from Italy, from like the Middle East or from like Egypt and stuff like that. And so we all know that there was this, hieroglyphic association with the tarot coming from Egypt, and et cetera, et cetera. De Guaitas was was a teacher of the Kabbalah, a master of occult, doctrine, and he influenced Wirth greatly in the creation of the decks he created. He created 2 decks, one in 1896, and then, or 1899, let me look at my deck, no, 1889, excuse me, which was like a full 20 years before the Rider-Waite-Smith pack came out. And then almost as a knee-jerk reaction to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which came out, about 17, almost 20 years later in 1926, he created a second deck, largely based on the first one, but kind of elaborating the beauty of it to make it kind of look like it might have looked, ideally to them in the Middle Ages, from the Middle Ages. So they never really acknowledged, or maybe they didn't know that the cards were created and the game was invented. Not that the cards themselves came from the Middle East for sure, but the game of tarot itself, was invented and developed in Italy. And so they either conveniently didn't, disregarded that information, or they just didn't know. But at any rate, he came up with these 2 decks. Now, the 2 decks that I'm going to show that are authentically recreations of his are decks that I bought from Marco Benedetti. I've had them for a few years. It's just a simple tuck box. It was either, I think, maybe Make Playing Cards or a place like that. I don't even remember where I bought them. But if you look for Marco Benedetti on his Facebook page, you'll find links to be able to buy his decks. Now, this box came with 3 decks. One of them was a simple line drawing. So I don't know if Marco himself reduced the drawings to simple line drawings, or if somehow he got his hands on the line drawings of Wirth. But I'm not going to be showing this deck. I'm going to be showing the other 2 decks that he created, or he reproduced. The 3rd deck I'm going to show is the one by U.S. Game Systems, which was inspired by Wirth, but was not created by Wirth. And why would I show it? Well, I don't know. I just thought I would. So let me flip the camera and get on with it. I think what I'll do first to get it out of the way is just show you the U.S. Game Systems Inc. deck that I purchased as a teenager in the 70s or 80s. This deck, however, is a replacement deck. As I mentioned, my original got lost. But at any rate, I've had this one for a long time, probably from the late 90s at least. So you see, I didn't know. I mean, I recognized, the cast of characters. I knew who they were. But, at some point, I became intrigued by that. And that's when I purchased the book. And I started to read in Wirth's own words what his deck was about. And he kind of lost me. It seemed kind of formulaic. I had already been understanding how to read the tarot, and these symbols here really brought nothing to me. The Egyptian references were like, what? So it wasn't in my DNA. it really wasn't. But I wanted to understand and I wanted to learn, which is why I purchased the book. To learn more about what he was thinking. And then, of course, I just thought, his approach isn't for me. However, one thing that he wrote in the book, which stayed with me, it's like probably the only thing I remember after all these years, is that, isn't that gorgeous? Is that don't listen to what anybody else says about the meanings of the cards. Essentially you have to have your own relationship with the cards and your own understanding. Now, I think that is true to a large part, although I don't think you can rightly ignore the origin stories of the cards, because the origin stories tell you where they're from. And if you understand something from its inception as well as you can, you have a much better understanding of how to deal with it, right? I mean, a doctor, I think, probably needs to understand an illness at its cellular level to know how to cure it, right? Or to know how to cope with it or fix it. And not that there's anything that needs to be fixed about tarot, but I think it's kind of along the same lines, that if you understand something at its truth, or its basic truth, then you have a better grasp, which is, what my lessons and my classes all kind of address, is understanding the tarot in its, isn't that beautiful? I mean, people hate this deck because it's not genuine, but look, it's not a genuine Wirth. It's inspired, but I still think some of these cards are lovely. I think one of the things they don't like is that it's got like this brass, background. Okay, so that's out of the way. Now, Di Guaita, more or less persuaded Wirth to recreate the tarot, or to restore the tarot, because by then what they had was in France was the TDM, the Tarot of Marseille, because it was believed that the TDM was a corruption of what the original cards handed from the hieroglyphs, or from Egypt, or from wherever they thought they came from. So he knew Wirth had artistic talent, and he basically wanted Wirth to recreate a deck to restore what was lost through the ages, to restore it, to its supposed hieroglyphic origins. Then, so in 1889, he created this deck. This is the deck by Marco Benedetti, as well as this one. So here we have it. So this, and then you see it's a cat, which is why I think, it's always been ambiguous in the TDM whether it's a cat or a dog. So it's kind of interesting they saw it as a cat. And rather than, representing the magician as a con man or a mountebank, we see now he has the symbols of the deck of cards, right? We have the coins, we have the cups, we have the blades, the swords, and we have a baton. And aside from having the four symbols of the deck of tarot, he sort of became elevated to, not being a con man at the most basic level, but a like a magus, a magi, right? Like someone who has like some power, but he is only one, he's only labeled number one. And, if you follow the origin story, or if, you're familiar with how he appeared in the earlier decks, he was really just a con man, or at his highest elevation may have been as a cobbler. And as I mentioned, this deck came out a full 20 years before the Rider-Waite-Smith pack came out. And you'll notice that Justice is still 8. That had not happened. That change to number 11 hadn't happened with Wirth. He recognized and retained 8 for Justice. But the Hermit now has a snake, which may or may not, I don't know, have been a reference to Prudence. And we see a lot of, in addition to the Kabbalistic markings, we see references to, Egypt, and having a sphinx here, and in the chariot we saw 2 sphinxes in place of horses. He names death. We see a butterfly in addition to the stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stars. And water from the pitcher is being poured into the river as well as onto the land, which then seems to flow back into the river. And we have what appeared to be a youthful male and female couple. Now, in 1926, and there were 350 of these decks circulated, so only 350 of these decks were created. Then around, 1924, 1925, he decided to kind of update his deck in an effort to further create a deck in accordance with what it might have looked like had it survived from the Middle Ages. And maybe it was in response to the Rider-Waite-Smith pack, supplanting his deck. So we have kind of essentially the same figure, right? But except it's embellished with gold, or I guess it's embellished with gold. I think Marco created a really beautiful deck like this with gold leaf, and that was the one I thought I was ordering, but I accidentally ordered the wrong one. So I ended up with this one, which is fine. I saved myself a couple bucks. But you see, there are some differences. And the backs are simple. I don't know what the original backs were. Again, very similar. Right. Very similar with the four suits represented. Now, here we have even more of a lemniscate suggestion than we had in the first one. Some significant changes here. And we do have the a triple tiered crown, fully articulated. And rather than having the hats of a pilgrim, it almost looks like they may have been cardinals. I'm not sure. And here they look, like maybe, I don't know. They have the tonsured head of a person in the clergy, so I imagine they were men of the cloth. Very similar, except in the original of 1889, excuse me, Cupid is blindfolded, and here he is not. And with whenever I do a tirage and croix, I will typically, most frequently, use this deck by Wirth, and he's the one who created the spread, the Tirage and Croix. I've done many videos on the Tirage and Croix, and I will include a few links to them below. So that's where the Tirage and Croix came from, was from Oswald Wirth. And he only used the cards from the higher trump order. He didn't, because he did not create a pip deck. He just created the 22. He created, I guess, 2 decks of trump cards. 1889 and somewhere around 1926. I prefer the earlier deck. I like it better. And as far as, the Egyptian and Kabbalistic references, I ignore them. They mean, nothing to me. They're not in my DNA. My people were from Italy and Spain. And, I try to, I really read this book in earnest, and I really tried to adopt it, but I realized that it's just not who. Did I already look at these? Yeah. It's just, it's just not how I, it's just not my, what's the word? It's not how I bond it with the cards. I had already been reading the cards for a number of years before I came, a couple of years before I came across these cards. And then definitely by the time I read the book, I just didn't have any connection to the method. But his words were, don't let me or anyone else tell you how to read the cards. You have to have your own relationship with them. I mean, you get ideas, if you do it long enough, you're bound to have guidance, along the way, right? Only an ignorant person, wouldn't, maybe a surgeon would say, you have to have your own bedside manner or whatever, but you do sort of kind of have to learn how to do things in any line of work, not just like medicine, but business or real estate or whatever. Same with tarot, right? You might learn from other people, but the most important thing is to pick and choose what you want, apply it to yourself, and then create your own, establish your own relationship with the cards that you understand. It may be in agreement with someone else, but you may only take a little bit from here and there. Now, I took a little bit from here and there. I have a little bit of the occultists. I have a little bit from how I imagined, you know, my ancestors probably interpreted the cards. From what I know from my own family, I know my great-grandmother was a tarot card reader. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Alrighty then. So I brought this video to under 30 minutes, and I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I'll post some links down below regarding videos that I did doing the Tirage and Croix, and using just a 22 card deck. And for those of you who are learning, or you want to learn, you know, I would suggest that the Tirage and Croix is a great deck to use when you're learning. Excuse me, a great spread to use when you're learning, because it's only 5 cards. Each position has a positional meaning, so it kind of makes it easier for you, so that you're not like trying to, you might not be at the level yet to be able to just understand the cards, what they mean just by, you know, by their appearance, right? So it kind of gives a little bit of structure. And, you know, by using only the higher order, the trump cards, it makes it a lot easier to understand and to interpret a spread, you know, right? Especially if you have an understanding of what these cards mean. Okay, friends, so until next time, peace and stay well.